Do Hollywood studios and filmmakers not have faith in ridiculous superhero costumes? I know they pop up every now and then, and I have high hopes for that trend to continue, but I can't help but think Hollywood still has some kind of allergy to bright comic accurate weirdness. Welcome to Sandwich Reviews. I'm the Talking Sentient Sandwich, and I guess it depends on the day, but so long as everyone is committed to the look, 99% of the time, I'll accept a vibrant and dumb comic book costume no matter what it's for. Simply due to how many superheroes exist and how many looks have already been played out, especially when you start looking at the bottom of the barrel, a lot of these costumes don't look good in the slightest. In fact, a lot of them are truly terrible. Yet despite that, when something works, it just works. And when you go back to the beginning, to the circus strongman design at the foundation of almost all superhero costumes, it's easy to forget that these characters took decades to worm their way into public knowledge. There are plenty of classic comic book looks that people are more accepting of, despite certain flaws, just because people can see when genuine effort went into designing them. That or so much time has gone by that people just let it slide. The concept of Batman or Superman might be the dumbest thing in the world, yet because of decades of history depicting them as serious heroes, they've become part of our modern day mythology. And that brings me to the main point of this video: how nothing would look good unless shown to the audience and given time for it to grow on them. The absolutely phenomenal season of X-Men 97 was able to bring back a faithful depiction of their characters by not shying away from anything that might seem campy or dumb, because that's exactly what makes it work. Just take a look at Cyclops and Jean for their final suit-up. I mean, look at those nerds. But throughout the show, we get faithful one-to-one adaptations of the original costumes from the Chris Claremont era or other iconic looks from the X-Men comics, colors and all. And because of that, I was practically jumping out of my seat every time I saw them. As well as that, the Spider-Verse movies are able to show many different alternate Spider-Men, and each is accepted either because it's a well-known comic book look or simply from the amazing design and techniques flexed to make them. But that's for animated costumes, which will always be easier to adapt, simply because watching an animated feature, no matter what it is, there is an inherent suspension of disbelief because what you're watching isn't real. When transitioning something to live action, many problems can come up. When an artist is drawing something for an animated feature or a comic book, they can express whatever style or flair they want. For someone like Alex Ross, they actually have someone put spandex on and have them pose. It's why his art is so extraordinary, but the artistic intent is still there. For live action, someone has to actually put the costume on and step in front of the camera, which sometimes absolutely works, but sometimes it just doesn't. On rare occasion, you get John Cena, who proudly wears his ridiculous costume to multiple press events and the red carpet premiere of the movie. But that's an exception. Most of the time, especially when you look at superhero movies pre-Marvel, you get an actor spouting lines and making their marks, yet clearly embarrassed the whole time. They'll stay as far away from the costume as they can get. But if I'm honest, all it takes is an objectively attractive person with a square jaw to confidently put on a dumb costume, and suddenly, it's cool. There are limits to that, but even those can be pushed and changed, because people's opinions are fluid. As I alluded to before, all it takes is a day for people to mull over something, and they can change their mind. Most of the time it takes much longer than that, but people are still capable of deciding that they were mistaken about something. And though there is the odd one out that truly looks incredible before the 2010s, not a lot of Hollywood studios were open to putting a comic-accurate costume on screen. Obviously, there's Superman, Batman, and later on Spider-Man, which were given the time and budget to craft incredible-looking costumes. But for characters less important and with less influence, it's much more difficult to convince producers to spend their money on the costume. Batman has gone through the most interpretations, a lot of which are far from the spandex of the comics, but that's allowed for more looks to be seen, and it's possibly just recency bias, but Robert Pattinson's Batman just looks so incredibly good. Ben Affleck's Batman was very comic book, and he looked like he was built like a brick house, which I loved. But the best thing about the evolution of Batman's suit is how the newer looks have become more mobile with each iteration. Putting aside Adam West and the TV serials before him, which do have their place, but being able to move in the suit is astonishingly useful for action choreography, and just moving around in general, especially when you think about how Batman wasn't able to turn his neck until The Dark Knight. Michael Keaton famously had to be craned out of the Batmobile, though I think that story might just be a rumor. But that's getting into the weeds about the construction of a costume, which is far from my wheelhouse. What I like to think is in my wheelhouse are comic books and superheroes. And sometimes horror movies, because I really like horror movies. But that's beside the point. What needs to be stressed is the fact that superheroes should look like superheroes. When adapting a look, why not just keep it simple? Marvel has a certain knack for over-designing their suits, but more often than not, they do a good job of giving a character their original look. I could do without the dozens of detail lines and textures, but I can't deny they look cool. Sometimes you get a costume like Captain America in the first Avengers movie, but if you take another look at it, it doesn't look that bad. As long as the cowl is taken off. But with the cowl, just look at how they massacred my boy. On that note, helmets are usually what doesn't work when it comes to superhero costumes. I'm not sure if it comes down to how bulky a lot of them come off as, but helmets are never used. There's plenty of examples like Wolverine's recent, sometimes touchy CG mask, which I loved anyway, but the best one to look at is Thor's. In the comics, he's always been sporting the same Viking Bowl helmet, and for a split second, he wears a genuinely good-looking one in his first movie. But he quickly takes it off and proceeds to never put it back on. I'll give Taika Waititi a point on the board for bringing back a cyberpunk future version of his helmet in Ragnarok, but that point is quickly cast aside because of whatever VFX nightmare this is from Love and Thunder. Nonetheless, no matter what, masks are always taken off in the third act so the actor can give a big acting moment, and I'm all for that, but let them have the dumb mask or helmet up until that point. Definitely don't use this for the upcoming Blade film that I hope actually does eventually come out, but Blade used to wear a yellow visor and a bright, sometimes orange, sometimes neon yellow jacket. Wesley Snipes reinvented pretty much everything about the character, including giving him superpowers, because before the first movie, Blade was only immune to vampires and didn't have their powers. But if Marvel is going to make another, why not differentiate him from what we've seen before? Mahershala Ali can pull off anything, so just put him in that ridiculous costume and I guarantee you he could make it work. Obviously, it's a lot harder to make that look cool compared to the black trench coat, but please, if a character is dumb in the comics, and believe me, everyone has at least had their phase, but don't shy away from that, lean into it. Black Bolt had a tuning fork on his head in Doctor Strange Multiverse of Madness, and I loved it. Mysterio's fishbowl helmet is quite possibly the stupidest thing I've ever seen, but with the whole look, and just from the fact that they went for it, it was fantastic. And contextually in the story of Far From Home, it makes sense. It's Quentin's lower tech heads up display. And I've already talked about John Cena's Peacemaker, who proudly wears a dumb toilet bowl helmet on his head whenever the character was suited up, because that's the character. The filmmakers didn't sacrifice that to make it look cool. Instead, they took on the challenge to make that look cool. There should never be anything wrong with leaning into what made the property famous in the first place. Clearly, the colors on set and in the lighting should be vibrant, but the costumes should be as well. There's no need to tone something down. If the character has a bright costume in the comics, bring that color out in the movie. Make it pop. I'm hyped just seeing that in the first place, but that also gives the audience something distinguishable to look at during the action. You may or may not have seen The Fall Guy, but there's an awesome fight scene in a club where Ryan Gosling is wearing neon, and everything is better simply because you can easily see and identify the main character. The one time a true adaptation of a comic book look didn't work was with Diamondback at the end of season 1 of Luke Cage. He just straight up looked like a stupid turtle, so don't do that. And in a recent review, I talked about how I've never liked Batman with long curved ears, despite the comic book history with him having that exact look. So I should admit that not every comic book design is a winner, but I also know that if everyone commits, I'll probably accept anything. But before I wrap up, I need to bring up one last thing, because it's my biggest pet peeve for movies to give someone an iconic look or weapon, but only for the final shot. I kinda hinted at this earlier, but if you're going to go through the time and effort to make something comic or lore accurate, let the character have it for the third act. Or better yet, let them have it for the whole movie. If there's one thing I'm optimistic about, it's that we'll continue to get accurate and sometimes even unique on-screen versions of iconic characters that up until now we've only dreamed of seeing. But what's your take on ridiculous superhero costumes? Do you have a favorite costume? Maybe one that hasn't been seen in live action yet? Drop a comment and let me know. And as always, thanks for watching. Make sure to leave a like, subscribe for weekly video essays and reviews, and enjoy a delicious sandwich.